We have, over the past several weeks, we've looked at 7 things that have marked the life of a first-generation disciple. And just to run through them, the first thing is that they accepted the message, right? There were 3,000 people after Peter gave a sermon, gave the gospel message, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. 3,000 people accepted the message, the text says. Once they accepted, next thing they did is they were baptized. Those who accepted it, part of that message was be baptized, Peter said. So they said, okay, and 3,000 were baptized on that day. They were added, the text says, to their number. So they weren't doing faith on their own. They weren't thinking, hey, we got this. We don't need you guys. They became part of the church body, large collective body of Jesus Christ. They became part of that number. They were devoted to the apostles' teachings. They were devoted to learning. We continue that today by reading what the apostles wrote. We don't have the apostles here, but we're still devoted. They were devoted to learning. We want to be devoted to learning too. Became part of the fellowship, which is bigger than like a potluck dinner. It's like a deeper spiritual thing where brothers and sisters in Christ, there's a connection we have through Jesus. They became part of that. They broke bread together. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. In their homes, when they were together in the temple courts, they remembered Jesus and his sacrifice, the blood he shed for us. We do that every week here, and we just did a few moments ago. And then they prayed like it meant something. It wasn't like part of their religious duties. It wasn't just part of their check-off list for the day, getting ready to go for the work or whatever. It meant they were talking to God himself, and they prayed fervently, and things happened because they prayed. Today we're going to look at number 8 in this list of 10 that we're looking at, and actually this one's kind of between the lines a little bit. It doesn't come out and say it directly necessarily, but it definitely is part of what we're reading, and that's they lived in community. This is going a little like a step further than what we're talking about with fellowship recently. This is, the fellowship was the common bond that we share in Christ, and this goes into really the application of that, what it looks like to be part of the fellowship. And this is like the nuts and bolts, the everyday thing. Verse 44 says that the believers were together and held all things in common. It goes on to talk about their generosity toward one another and those around them. We'll talk about that next week. It talks about the kinds of things they did as part of the fellowship, as part of the community, being this community of believers. They met together every day, verse 46 says. They met in the temple. They met in their homes. They broke bread in their homes. They ate food together. They were just, kind of one of the catchphrases of our church age today is like, oh, they were doing life together. I mean, but they really were. They were living their lives together. Meeting in the temple, it didn't look quite like how we do things today. Like we come together for a church service at 9 or 10:30, and we sit in little rows and you hear someone speak, and there was definitely people speaking. The apostles were teaching, but it looked a little bit differently. It wasn't an enclosed room like this with the rows and an organized order of service like we do. Meeting in the temple would have looked like, here's a drawing of the temple and the temple courts. They would have been meeting in the temple courts, so it might have been a traveling around. If you look at the little tiny rectangle on the bottom here, that's the size of a football field. So we're talking multiple football fields, large court area, where maybe the apostles would be hanging out and believers would combine and say, hey, there's Peter, let's go talk to him. And they'd get a gather, and pretty soon there'd be a little crowd of people, clusters of people, and then maybe they had specific times. Maybe they said, hey, we're meeting together at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Everybody show up. And some came, and maybe some came later. But it was every day, in and out. So I get the impression the apostles just kind of hung out there, and church leaders hung out there, and people would come and go, and there was activity all day long, every day. I think it's kind of maybe, and this is just speculation, maybe it's kind of like how it is when we have teams that go to Africa. And we'll maybe rent a school, or if we're at a church that has a building, we'll say a building. We'll have a location. We'll tell people, hey, everybody, at 9 o'clock we're having a church service tomorrow, or 7 o'clock tonight there's a revival meeting. And people come like when they get there. They're not all like hooked to their watches to make sure that they're at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock or 7 o'clock. Some show up at 7:30, some show up at 8, some show up at 9, and things start going, and by 11:30, more people show up. That's why their services might last 2 or 3 hours, because people just show up when they show up. Because maybe they had to feed the cows before they got there, or maybe they had some other chores to do, or maybe there was something going on that they couldn't just show up at 10 o'clock or whatever time we had said. And so we'll see the crowd fluctuate, grow and smaller and smaller, and then we'll eat together, and the more will come, and it's just interesting to watch that happen. One of the reasons we buy T-shirts for the kids, and we give out the kids, is we'll give the kids these T-shirts, and then they're just walking advertisements. People find out the Americans are in town, and then the kids are running off, hey, where'd you get that T-shirt? Oh, the Americans brought them. And then they'll bring friends, and you might start out with a small handful, and by the afternoon, you've got hundreds of children that have come, and they're getting to hear the gospel, and they're getting to hear teachings about Jesus and everything. So I kind of see this early church generation was kind of more like that than maybe how we do it. And that's more of a cultural thing. That's not right or wrong or good or bad. It's just kind of how their culture worked. It's always stuck out to me that the early Christians met in the temple courts and in their homes every day. I mean, you see it multiple places in Scripture. It was every day. They broke bread together every day. Sometimes they had that was part of a meal. Sometimes it was set aside as purely a communion like we do. I mean, but it was both. Communion would be part of a meal. It wasn't very rigid. It was very organic, and there was a flow to it. Not necessarily a formal meeting like we often have. It was Christians just kind of living their lives together, living out their faith together. Now, in the West, churches have tried to duplicate that in today's world by offering things like small groups, and Bible studies. We have a 9 o'clock Bible study here for the adults, and of course all the kids too, Sunday school, the worship nights. But we're just not set up the same way. We don't, I don't hang out here all day long and people don't just kind of show up and we talk Jesus, There people may come and go, but it's not like an all-day thing every day. There's not like thousands of people who flow through the building throughout the week wanting to gather and talk Jesus and break bread together. Even in the small groups, I mean, we have specific groups at specific times. It's not like, hey, let's just go to the Jones's house and see what happens. It's not as organic, but we still had to duplicate that a little bit. The reason being, of course, and you know this, is most of us keep pretty tight schedules. We don't have a lot of time to just kind of wander around and see if anything's going on. We work several hours a day. Our children are involved in sports or school events or activities, all the stuff that they can be a part of. And when we aren't working or supporting our kids in all their activities, there's a myriad of entertainment that's available. There's movies to watch and concerts to go to and gatherings to be a part of. And sometimes when all that's not happening, you just need a moment to kind of sit down and kind of regather yourself after a busy week or whatever. And the rest of the week can be so exhausting. So it's hard to have the organic meetings that they had in the first century. We can go through seasons where our schedules are so full. We have to drag ourselves even to get to church on Sunday morning. Sometimes we're just like, oh, I got to get there. I just want to sleep, but I'm going to go to church anyway. And we're just plain worn out. I think it's especially challenging for parents who are trying to balance this plethora of activities that your kids have available to them, and you want them to be involved with things, to keep them growing, maturing, and healthy, and all that good stuff. But to balance that with the eternal value of developing relationships with fellow believers, how do we help our children connect with Jesus people so that they can help them? They can go through the growing up years together and have some strength and a foundation with Christian friends. We, as parents, went through that whole thing with our children. They did everything, the softball and the swim team and basketball and show choir and jazz band and private lessons and all the classes and all that stuff. They were also at church every Sunday, including set up and tear down back in those days, participated in the youth group, attended all the events that we did. And so we would have to, as parents, regularly have conversations and just kind of evaluate how are we helping our children, how are we setting them up for success spiritually, eternally, which is more important than setting them up for success, financially. We want to do both, but if we were to prioritize, we're much more desiring for them to be in eternity with us than to have a good income. So we would constantly ask ourselves, well, how will this activity, impact our kids spiritually? How will this help them develop friends that will not pull them away from God, but draw them to God? How can we help monitor that in their life? And honestly, as adults, we have to have that same conversation with us. What are we doing to enhance our kingdom of God involvement? What are we doing who do we hang out with? Do they pull us toward God or away from God? Are the activities I'm doing helping me grow in my relationship with Christ, or do I kind of wander because the things are kind of pulling me away from Him? Now, I don't know what the first generation disciples did with their time, but they do know somehow they figured out a way to meet literally every day in the temple courts and in their homes. Now, again, they may not be all the believers every day, every time. It wasn't like all 3,000 from that first day, or it grew exponentially, 10,000 people, showing up at the 10 o'clock service every day. It wasn't like that's why it was more organic. It was all day long, throughout the day, in and out, people coming and going in homes and wherever they gathered. They just knew the people were meeting. It was happening all the time. It wasn't, we have church on Sundays at 9 and 10:30, and then we have a men's group on Saturday at 8:30. We have a women's group on Wednesday night. It wasn't that. It was just all the time. It was just happening. It just worked for their culture that way. Again, that's not good or bad or right or wrong, or we're not doing it. It's just different. Our cultures are just different. We've answered that to the best of our ability need to build community within our church family by at least offering a plethora of opportunity. Where there's plenty of opportunity. The adult Bible study that meets every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. There's community that gets formed within the class. The conversation is happening, and they're growing together, and they're having common conversations and challenges and talking things through. The small groups that meet throughout the week, those are different groups of people that are meeting together and having those conversations and growing together, working through struggles of life together. The youth group that meets on Wednesdays, those are teens meeting together and struggling through life together as well. The junior choir on Wednesday nights, the men's group on Saturday, the women's on Wednesday nights. We periodically do the auxiliary classes, or small groups class, or growing in the Christian faith class or something. We'll throw those out. The part of that's to teach something valuable. Part of that is then that group has gone through something together and you've built some community. You have a shared experience with someone and some shared conversation, and that's all about building community. Now, do you have to do every event that is offered? Of course not, David. We understand that. Nobody's trying to guilt you into doing more and more and more. Is it beneficial for you? Absolutely. So you got to prioritize in your own family, your own setting, your own situation. What can we do, and how can we be healthy and be engaged with these things? But the more you engage in, the deeper you are in the community of this believers. The more you know people, the more you have shared experiences with them, the more you understand each other on a personal level. Now, it doesn't come out and say this. I didn't get this outline out of the text, but if you look between the lines of the text we've been reading the last few weeks, there are 4 different ways that our first generation disciples lived out their community. And I just want to cover that briefly. Number 1 is they lived in community physically. There's physical relationships that took place, and relationships. The church is built on relationships. I heard someone say recently, look at your 5 closest friends or people you hang out with. They will determine the quality and direction of your life. And that's really true. The people you hang out with affect you, the way you think, the way you talk, the priorities you have in life. Hung out with a couple guys last night, and we had dinner together, shared a meal, and talked to ministry, and talked to kingdom, and dreams, and vision, and stretching, and it was an exciting and invigorating conversation that's also can be a little uncomfortable, like, can we do this? It's like, you look at how do we reach more people? What do we do, to grow the kingdom? I love conversations like that, but that's community. That was just sitting down over a meal, breaking bread together, and talking Jesus, and dreams, and goals, and that's true community going on there. The people you're in community with are people that they're your friends, right? They're the ones who can call you at 3 a.m. and you're going to go, oh, I better get this, Not like, well, we'll see what that was later. They're the people who you check in on when you know they're not feeling well, or they'll check in on you because they want to make sure you're doing okay. The ones who that you make you a meal when you're not feeling well, or your schedule is just overwhelming, and they just want to help you out, and they make care of you. Want to make sure you have something to help you out with. Here's a meal or something, or take you out for ice cream when they can tell you need a little encouragement. You're just a little down. Like, let's go do something. They just want to give you a break from life for a moment. They don't care if your clothes match perfectly, or if it's ironed properly, or if your hair is combed the way it should be in perfect order, or if your shoes are stained green because you just mowed the yard and you didn't change your shoes and you're walking around with, goofy looking shoes. That's what I do sometimes. They're there to see you. That's what matters, because you're in community together. I've been meeting with Kevin Fuller. He's roaming around here for like 15 years, maybe more, I don't know, in an accountability group called CAP now, Christian Accountability Group. And that's community. We're in community together. We can say things to each other that nobody else can. We'll confess things to one another we'd never tell anybody else. We fight for each other. We've wept for each other. We've challenged each other. We've prayed weekly for each other. We have been hard on each other. That's what community is, the physical relationship. We sit down across from the table with each other, and sometimes it's over a meal. We say, dude, what are you doing? How's your life? And why did you let that happen? Stop it. Or here, let's go in this direction. We got each other reading Numbers right now. I would never read Numbers if I didn't have a guy saying, hey, have you read those chapters yet? And I'm like, oh, it took me a couple weeks. I was like, well, I almost got them all. Then we got to start over, and we got to go back to the beginning. And so it took us a couple weeks to read the chapters that we had set for that week. But it's because we're in community together. On Monday nights, we do this podcast, Life in the Path. The guys who used to be on staff here, and then they started a church, and that we're still in community together, though, because every Monday night we together, we talk Jesus, we talk ministry, we talk challenges, we talk about what's going on out there, kingdom stuff. We have kingdom dreams. We have those invigorating conversations, and some of the best conversations are after we've turned off the cameras and his little podcast thing, the vodcast thing we do, and after we turn off the recording, and then we'll go for another 2 hours and just talk stuff, Jesus stuff, and how are we doing? And there have been times that we've been doing this probably 11, 12 years, and there were times I thought, why are we still does anybody care? Does anybody even care? And then we'll look in the numbers. Actually, there's tons of people listening, which is like bizarre to us. Like, why would they listen to this? But even if nobody was, we said we'd still do this because it was valuable to us in that room. It's genuine community going on. It just other people get to kind of have a little bird's eye and see what we're talking about when we do that. That's physical, living out physical relationships in community. Second way the church, first generation Christians did community was they lived in community emotionally. Verses 46 and 47 says they ate their food with joyful and sincere hearts, praising God, enjoying the favor of the people. There was some joy, there was some sincerity, they were actually emotionally involved with one another too. A documentary was put together a while back where they studied the emotional connection between relational connectedness and happiness. Like, if you hang out with people, you're happier than if you're alone, if you don't hang out with people. And out of the research, they produced a documentary called This Emotional Life. Here's a quote from that documentary. It says, researchers have found that people are happier when they are with other people than when they are alone, and the boost is the same for introverts and extroverts. So whether you're the person who likes to hide in the corner and in the shadows, that's me. I'd be much more happier just kind of hiding in the back and watching. Or if you're the person who likes to be the life of the party, put the hat on and dancing around, everybody's clapping and singing around you. Either way, just being with people, the boost is the same as far as upping your happiness. I'm thrilled to go to a concert and just sit back with my arms folded and go, yeah, and watch everybody going crazy. I enjoy watching all the people do this stuff, but I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy running around doing somersaults and going crazy at the concert. Thoroughly love it. I leave encouraged, and everybody's like, come on, do your just don't want to. I'm happy. I'm happy in my little corner. It's just the way I'm wired. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just interesting that the results are the same. Being with people help people. It goes on to say they're also finding that the happy people are more pleasant, helpful, and sociable. So being around other people makes us feel happier, and when we're happier, we are more fun to be around, creating an upward spiral of happiness. I think that's interesting choice of words, an upward spiral of happiness, just being connected to a group of people. I've often heard depression described as, something happens in your life, a trauma, an event, something, and you're trying to, you're working your way out of it, and then something else happens, and I've often heard it as a downward spiral. Have you ever heard that? And even whether it's real or not, or imagined, you start sinking down and down. Even little things start seeming bigger than they are, and you just get down. You can get down so much that you can't get out alone. You need help. Whether it's a friend or a therapist or something has to pull you out because you've spiraled down that much. It's interesting that the research shows one way to reverse that is being in a community of people where we're doing life together, where we're hanging out together, we're common believers and sharing the same ideas and ideals and vision for the community. We want people to come to Christ, and we want to know more about Jesus and how to live his ways. Just hanging out with each other starts to reverse the trend and creates an upward spiral of happiness. Just thought that was interesting. I don't spend a lot of time at the building. There's some stuff I just have to do here. I'm much more effective going to a restaurant with a laptop and working on a sermon than I am sitting in my office with no windows. There's no window in this whole building, right? I mean, I just kills me. But I don't even have to talk to anybody. I can be in a room full of people. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just happy as a lark. I do, it's just, I can identify with what they discovered here. Living in community helps you emotionally. It just does. The third thing, I won't hit this very hard because we've talked about it really in the previous weeks. They lived in community spiritually. They were devoted to the apostles' teaching. It was a spiritual thing. I want to learn what does the Bible have to say. They broke bread together. That's a spiritual thing. They prayed together. They worshiped together. Those are spiritual things. I'll just point out that we're devoted. It's not like they were really committed that one day, but it was like they repeated day after day after day after day in the grammar. It's a repeated type of thing. Constant, continual gathering together, doing spiritual things, growing spiritually together. They never stopped. They always continued. They lived together in community spiritually. And then the fourth one is they lived in community missionally. The Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Verse 47 says, and I get the impression that they weren't like sharing gospel tracts with people. They were just living together in community, physically and emotionally and spiritually, just living their lives, doing their faith. And as people witnessed that, and as people, because it was in public, like the temple area, as people observed that, they wanted in. I want to be part of that. And God was adding to their number daily, so that the church was growing just by them being in community together. Who doesn't want to be in community? Who doesn't want to have that be part of their lives? And I don't know if it is the same for you, but for me, I do so much more in community than I ever would alone. I mean, there are things that we do. That being in a group helps us be more missional with the people around us. The things I do are because I know you're with me. You're doing it too. In the early days of COVID and things were shutting down, we didn't know what was going on for sure. And I think at the HEPA apartments, like these are most retired people, so that a lot of them would be in that high level of risk, and so they were shut down. And we started thinking, well, boy, what are they doing for food, And so people within the church started bringing groceries, and we kind of said, hey, let's all make sure they have groceries. And we started gathering food, and we had sack after sack. Like we got the number of residents that lived there, number of apartments, and everybody had like 2 or 3 sacks of groceries that you all provided. No way I would have done that alone. I would have thought, oh man, that's too bad. But because there's us, we're like, yeah, let's do that. And it was so cool taking grocery carts full of food to the apartment building that one time. Now, it didn't last forever, but it was several meals for people, and it was a missional thing that we did because we had each other to help. We go to Zimbabwe every year. I would never do that alone. I mean, what am I going to do walking around Zimbabwe? But a team, somehow things happen. Things happen, and all kinds of crazy things happen because it's community, a team that goes and does it. Our senior suppers, meals that we're having one tonight would never happen if it was just me or just you. I mean, at some point, it's going to end, but because there's a group of people that are involved that come together. Some cook, some serve, some help, some clean. All these people are together. In a missional way, we're encouraging a lot of folks in the neighborhood and within our church as well, because we're helping people. We're missional because we're doing it together. We're helping this Afghanistan family, refugee family that just needs to eat, right? And I wouldn't even think about doing that on my own. How could I possibly help a family of 8? I couldn't. But the first week, before we started, I went out and personally, bought a bunch of groceries because I knew next week someone else would, And we're at 52 weeks, we're going to do this, and everybody's bringing a little bit. If everybody brings a little bit, then we've brought a lot, and we feed a whole family. Together, we're involved in mission. Our community is in missional mode because we're together. None of us could do that, or even would probably even think about doing that on our own. But together we become missional. That's what was happening in the early church. We'll talk about the generosity next week. The things they were selling land, they're doing all kinds of stuff to help one another out and to help people because everybody was doing it. It wasn't just, let the rich people help them, or let the people who are unemployed do the service, or what it was everybody chipped in a little bit, which made a lot of things happen. It's because we're in community together. It's what we do. We're in a community of believers. We live together in a physical community, in physical relationships, and spiritual relationships. We're growing because of each other. Emotionally, we are stronger because of each other. Missionally, we are more effective. We're all better for it because we're in community together. I read this week there were 59 one another's in the scripture in the New Testament, and I'm just going to read through these. We'll kind of end with this. I'm not going to refer to all the scriptures. That'd take 3 days to do that. But just look at the things. They're all. I mean, one another is worded maybe a little bit differently in each verse. But this is describing community right here. Be at peace with each other. Wash one another's feet. This comes across many times. Love one another. 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 John's big on that, right? Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourself. Live in harmony with one another. Love one another. Stop passing judgment on one another. Accept one another, then as Christ accepted you. Instruct one another. Greet one another with a holy kiss. When you come together to eat, wait for each other. Have equal concern for each other. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Serve one another in love. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, you'll be destroyed by each other. There's a negative. Be careful. Let's not become conceited, provoking, and envying each other. Carry each other's burden. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. Speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In humility, consider others better than yourselves. Do not lie to each other. Bear with each other. Forgive what grievances you may have against one another. Teach one another. Admonish one another. Make your love increase and overflow for each other. Love each other. Encourage each other. Encourage each other. Build each other up. Encourage one another daily. Spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Encourage one another. Man, it sounds like community, doesn't it? Do not slander one another. Don't grumble against one another. Confess your sins to each other. Pray for each other. Love one another deeply from the heart. Live in harmony with one another. Love each other deeply. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others. Clothe yourself with humility toward one another. Greet one another with a kiss of love. And then he brings it home strong. John does. Love one another. 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 That's community. That's community. I hope that's what you crave. It's really, truly is how we're designed to be in community with one another, and how a church should work together. We're together. We're in community. Yeah, I changed the word. It's just what it is. And you become more connected the more you're involved, the more you do things, and that's just how it works. I hope to you. I hope it's not just a church service that you go to, but it's actually part of something bigger than that in your life. And if it's not, I would work toward that because that's healthy for you, and it's healthy for all of us.